The chamber of the Galactic Council was a cathedral of silence, its vaulted arches humming faintly with the vibration of distant reactors. Across the long obsidian table, species of every kind sat with postures ranging from rigid to trembling, their eyes fixed upon the figure who dared to disturb the order carved into centuries of precedent. Commander Veyrek of the Threx Dominion stood with a warrior's stance, his scaled jaw thrust forward, his voice carrying the metallic timbre of a soldier who had tasted countless victories. "The law is superstition," he declared, his claws tapping a rhythm on the polished surface. "This council clings to fear like a dying animal clings to life. The humans are a provincial species, locked to their pale worlds, propped up by the myths you spread. I will not let my dominion's expansion be shackled by ghost stories." A murmur spread among the assembled delegates, most recoiling from the blunt heresy. One figure leaned forward, old, his movements deliberate as though the weight of history pressed upon his shoulders. Ambassador Karan, whose tenure in the council spanned longer than Veyrek had lived, fixed the Threx commander with steady eyes. His voice was calm, but it carried like the sound of stones sliding into place. "Commander," Karan said, "you speak boldly, but you speak blind. The law was not etched out of superstition. It was written in the blood of empires stronger than yours, their fleet scattered, their homeworld silenced. Do you think yourself greater than the Vor Collective, who vanished overnight? Or the Orzek hierarchy, whose war chants fell quiet after they trespassed where they should not have?" Veyrek laughed, sharp and derisive, the sound echoing against the stone. "Old tales to frighten children. No evidence, no wreckage, no survivors. Only silence. Convenient silence, used to keep rivals in line. I am not a child, Ambassador. I am a commander of the Dominion, and I will show the galaxy that the humans are nothing more than flesh and noise." Several of the delegates lowered their gazes, unwilling to challenge him directly, but unwilling to endorse his defiance either. The law, simple, absolute, had been recited for generations in every chamber of power. Do not cross the humans. It was not questioned, not amended, not explained. It simply stood, cold and unyielding, like the edge of a cliff. Karan's gaze did not falter. "There is a reason there are no survivors," he said softly. "There is a reason there is no wreckage. When the humans act, they leave no threads behind. Do not mistake silence for weakness. Silence in their hands is final." The commander's jaw flexed. Pride, ambition, and disdain radiated from him like heat. "Then let them be silent. I will take the mining world at the edge of their claimed space. The Dominion needs its resources, and I will carve my legacy upon it. When my banners fly there, your law will collapse like the myths it was built on." No one interrupted him, but unease rippled through the chamber like invisible current. Whispers carried his name, some spoken in awe of his daring, others in quiet mourning for his impending doom. Among those whispers, one name recurred more often than any other, not spoken with derision but with a caution that bordered on reverence. Marcus Hale. Some claimed he was a soldier, others a shadow. Stories of him were inconsistent, fragmented, but all shared a core. When humans were threatened, he appeared, and when he appeared, enemies ceased to exist. Whether Hale was myth or man mattered little, his name hung in the air like a blade. Veyrek, however, did not flinch at its mention. "Marcus Hale," the commander sneered, as though the syllables themselves were a challenge. "A phantom, a weapon of rumor. Let him come. I will show him the strength of a Dominion fleet." Ambassador Karan leaned back, his lined features unreadable, though his eyes seemed to dim with the exhaustion of inevitability. He had seen this before, proud men standing on the threshold of the same abyss, each believing themselves immune to the fate of their predecessors. He had spoken warnings, and he had watched those warnings dissolve against the armor of arrogance. The chamber dissolved into administrative motions, hollow words about neutrality and jurisdiction, but no one truly believed they could stay the commander's hand. The law was clear, yet laws only mattered to those who valued survival over pride. Later, in the solitude of the Council's archives, Karan stood before a sealed chamber whose locks had not been disturbed for decades. Behind the reinforced glass sat fragments collected from forgotten wars, alien hulls twisted into incomprehensible shapes, weapons fused into slag by forces no scientist could replicate. None were labeled, for to name them would be to admit what had caused them. Karan bowed his head. "They will never learn," he whispered to the silent room. "Not until the lesson is carved into their bones." Beyond the archives, light years away, the Dominion fleet was already stirring. Engines roared to life, banners unfurled, and Veyrek's voice commanded thousands with unyielding certainty. To him, it was the beginning of triumph, the first stroke of a grand conquest. To the Council, it was the sound of inevitability, a familiar overture to an old tragedy. And in the quiet dark, where human space began, unseen eyes were already turning toward the disturbance. Whispers of movement threaded through the void. The law would be tested once more, and the galaxy would be reminded why it was written. The chamber's last echoes of Veyrek's laughter still hung in memory, but they would not last. For laughter, too, was silence, waiting to be claimed. "You said." The frontier outpost drifted in the black, its hull bristling with silent weapons, its shields humming faintly as though the stars themselves pressed against it. Inside the command deck, Captain Marcus Hale stood with hands folded behind his back, gaze fixed on the holomap that floated before him. The projection showed the mining world at the border, its orbit now illuminated with dozens of red markers, the advancing Threx fleet. Each pulsing icon represented a warship heavy with weapons, arrogant in formation, moving with the steady rhythm of an empire accustomed to domination. Lieutenant Anders approached, his movements precise, but tinged with unease. "They're not slowing, sir. Dominion scouts entered the buffer zone an hour ago. If they maintain speed, they'll reach the mining world in less than 2 cycles." Hale's eyes narrowed, the faintest crease forming in his otherwise impassive face. He was not a man of wasted words. "And the Council?" "No statement beyond the law, Captain." Anders hesitated. "They'll look to us for enforcement." That was the truth of it. The law was ancient, older than Hale's own service, but its weight always fell on human shoulders. The galaxy feared what humans did in war, and so the Council dared not police them directly. Instead, it left men like Hale to act, to decide whether the law would remain a warning or become a sentence. The comm line flickered, and the voice of Admiral Rourke filled the room. His tone was gravelly, shaped by decades of command and politics, but beneath it ran an iron calm. "Captain Hale, you've seen the Dominions move?" "Yes, Admiral. They are baiting us. Commander Veyrek thinks our silence is weakness. I would prefer we dissuade him, without spectacle." Hale inclined his head slightly, though he knew Rourke could not see it. Diplomacy has already failed. He has declared intent to seize the world. "Then you will intercept," Rourke said firmly. "But restraint, Marcus. Remember that the galaxy already fears us. We must not confirm every nightmare they whisper." The transmission ended, leaving the hum of the deck in its place. Anders stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Restraint. Always restraint. But Veyrek won't listen to warnings. You know that as well as I do." Hale turned from the holomap, his gaze falling on the young officer. His eyes were pale and steady, as if nothing in the void could shake them. "Restraint does not mean inaction. It means precision. We end this without escalation, without spectacle. That is our advantage." Anders swallowed, but nodded. He had followed Hale long enough to understand the weight behind those words. The captain's reputation was not built on brutality, but on exactness. When Hale struck, he left no unnecessary scars. To some, that restraint was more terrifying than slaughter. The crew moved with silent efficiency as orders rippled through the decks. Stealth frigates adjusted positions, their hulls blending with the void until they seemed to vanish. Orbital satellites reoriented, their sensors drinking in every faint emission from the advancing fleet. Human warships, sleek, angular, and patient, waited in the dark. Hale watched the preparations without speaking, his mind turning not to the logistics, but to the man who commanded the oncoming ships. He had studied Veyrek's record. The Threx commander was bold, reckless, his victories won by overwhelming force and intimidation rather than nuance. To such a man, the law was an insult. Hale understood him perfectly because arrogance was predictable, and predictability could be weaponized. Anders broke the silence. What if he calls our bluff? What if he refuses to retreat? Hale allowed the faintest shadow of a smile. Then we show him why the bluff was never a bluff at all. The tension in the deck was not panic, but anticipation. Every officer present had heard fragments of Hale's past campaigns. They whispered of the Ghost of Titan, who had led a single fleet against a coalition 3 times its size and left only silence in his wake. They spoke of the admiral who once surrendered a planet only to reclaim it within a week, not with bombardment, but with surgical strikes that left the enemy's command structure paralyzed. None of them knew every detail, but they knew enough to trust that when Hale prepared for war, it ended quickly. A signal pulsed across the board, Dominion long-range scans brushing against human space, arrogant, probing. Hale raised a hand, and the bridge fell silent. Do not answer. Do not engage. Let them wonder if we are watching. Doubt is the first cut. Minutes stretched, the only sound the soft cadence of systems reporting readiness. Then Hale spoke again, his voice level, carrying easily across the room. They seek to test the law. We will remind them why it was written. Anders exhaled softly, not with relief, but with the sharp focus of a soldier given clarity. Around them, the crew straightened, shoulders squaring, eyes narrowing. The moment before the storm had arrived. Hale returned his gaze to the holomap. The Dominion ships crept closer, unaware of the eyes that followed them, unaware of the blades already poised at their throats. He studied their formation as a surgeon might study an exposed artery, not with malice, but with certainty. There was no anger in him, no hunger for glory, only the absolute conviction of a man who understood the cost of failing his duty. Begin repositioning the fleet, he ordered, voice calm, final. Shadow their movements. They must never know when we are at their flank. And when the time comes, his words trailed for a moment, but the silence carried them further than any sound. When he spoke again, the crew felt the weight settle into their bones. We will end this before it begins. The holomap pulsed once more, the red tide pushing deeper into the border. In that quiet space between inevitability and response, the humans waited, their captain's steady presence anchoring them against fear. Somewhere out there, Commander Veyrek believed his legacy was beginning. Marcus Hale knew it was ending. You said. The Dominion fleet arrived with the arrogance of a parade. Their formations stretched wide across the void, banners of energy flaring from their hulls as though they sought to impress the stars themselves. Commander Veyrek stood on the bridge of his flagship, chin high, eyes gleaming with contempt. Before him, the disputed mining world turned slowly, its pale surface scarred with canyons of valuable ore. Not a single human vessel stood in open defense. See how they hide, Veyrek declared, his voice cutting through the command deck. The law is nothing but fear dressed as reverence. We are here, and they cower in silence. Signal the fleet, prepare orbital control. But as his officers bent to their consoles, one of them stiffened, frills tightening in alarm. Commander, movement detected. Unidentified mass signatures on multiple vectors. Veyrek's smile faltered. How many? The officer's throat clicked uneasily. Too many to count. They weren't there a moment ago. The void itself seemed to shimmer. From the darkness, human warships slid into view, their blackened hulls casting no reflection, their angles sharp and predatory. They had been waiting, unseen, for the Dominion to step fully into the noose. Veyrek's confidence cracked as he realized his fleet was not the hunter, but the quarry. On the deck of the human flagship, Marcus Hale stood with hands behind his back, as still as the void itself. His eyes studied the shifting projection of the battlefield, every Dominion ship glowing red against the pale blue of his own hidden squadrons. Beside him, Lieutenant Anders gripped the railing, tension carving lines into his youthful face. "They're surrounded," Anders whispered. "Every angle covered. They won't even know where to fire." Hale's expression did not change. "Confusion is the first strike. Execute pattern Sigma. Cut their relays." Across the stars, human frigates leapt into action. Invisible beams lanced out, not to shred hulls, but to sever the delicate links that bound Veyrek's fleet into unity. Within moments, Dominion comms dissolved into static. Officers shouted over one another, blind to their admiral's commands, their formations crumbling as uncertainty set in. On Veyrek's bridge, alarms howled. Communication grid failing. Sensor distortion spreading. "Compensate," Veyrek roared, fists curling. "Reroute through secondary channels. They are tricks, shadows." But shadows could kill. Hale's next order fell like a blade. "Strike the supply ships." Human cruisers moved with eerie silence, cutting into the Dominion's rear. Precision fire gutted freighters and ammunition carriers, their destruction blossoming as silent flares in the void. Without supply, the Dominion warships bled strength with every passing moment. Anders watched the display, awe mingling with dread. "They'll break, sir. They have to." "They will fight until their pride collapses," Hale replied. "That is when we close the fist." The Dominion, desperate, attempted retaliation. Their heavy battleships hurled plasma salvos into the dark, their cannons scorching empty space where they thought their enemies hid. Every wasted volley marked their blindness. And then, from nowhere, human destroyers answered, sleek, fast, striking and vanishing like ghosts. One Dominion warship after another buckled under precision bombardment, their engines silenced, their weapons cut away. Veyrek staggered as his flagship shuddered.
How?
How do they know where to strike? His voice rose to a roar. They should not know. A flicker of sound pierced the chaos. Against his will, against all his pride, Veyrek's comm line opened, and a human voice filled the deck.
Calm. Cold.
Absolute. You were warned. Every officer froze. The voice was Marcus Hale's, though none of them had ever heard it before. It was not the voice of fury, nor of triumph. It was simply final, the tone of inevitability. And then, just as suddenly, the channel closed, leaving only silence. Hale gave the next order, without hesitation. Target their command ships. Leave them adrift. Dominion vessels buckled one by one, not destroyed but rendered inert, engines crippled, reactors neutralized. It was not annihilation but humiliation, a scalpel cutting pride away piece by piece. Hale's restraint was precise, terrifying. He did not exterminate, he dismantled. On the human bridge, Anders exhaled in disbelief. We're crippling them without loss that feels like we're not fighting a battle, sir. It feels like we're teaching a lesson. Hale's pale eyes never left the collapsing fleet. That is all this ever was. In desperation, Veyrek ordered a charge, driving his flagship forward with reckless speed. Its cannons spat fire into the dark, trying to carve a path through the unseen net tightening around them. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might break through. Then a shadow fell across his path, Hale's flagship sliding into position, vast and unyielding. The Dominion commander's jaw clenched as alarms wailed. His engines sputtered under targeted strikes, his weapons fell silent as systems overloaded, and finally, with one last shudder, the great vessel ground to a halt in the void. The bridge lights flickered. Silence fell, oppressive and heavy. On Hale's deck, the display shifted. Every Dominion ship marked red had either fled, fallen, or hung powerless in orbit. Anders turned to his captain, awe and unease mingling in his voice. "The fleet is broken, sir. Their commander's ship is the last." Hale's gaze hardened, his words quiet but inescapable. "Then we show him what silence means." And with that, the trap was complete. The Dominion fleet, once a wall of fire and arrogance, now drifted as shattered fragments of pride. The mining world remained untouched, its orbit littered with the muted carcasses of Veyrek's ambition. Yet the battle was not over. For Hale knew the true weapon of humanity was not destruction. It was the memory they left behind. And that memory was about to be carved into Veyrek himself.
You said.
The Dominion flagship hung in the dark like a carcass suspended on invisible hooks, its hull charred, its engines lifeless. Inside, the silence was broken only by the groan of wounded metal and the labored breaths of crew who had not yet fled or fallen. Commander Veyrek sat slumped in his command chair, claws gripping the armrests as though force alone could anchor his shattered pride. The arrogance that had carried him here had drained from his eyes, leaving a hollow fury that burned hotter than any star. A tremor passed through the vessel, subtle but deliberate. Veyrek's officers exchanged glances before one whispered in dread, "They are boarding us." Moments later, the sound of precision charges echoed through the corridors. Human boots struck the deck with a rhythm that did not rush, did not hesitate. They moved like inevitability itself, methodical, unflinching. And then the doors to the bridge parted with a hiss. Marcus Hale entered first. His presence was not loud, not adorned with symbols of conquest, but the very absence of excess made him seem vast. His uniform was clean, unmarked by the battle that had just been waged. At his side walked Lieutenant Anders, his rifle lowered but steady, eyes sharp as they swept the alien crew. Behind them, a small cadre of soldiers fanned out, silent and watchful. Hale's gaze settled on Veyrek, and for a moment the commander felt the weight of it press heavier than chains. This was not the look of a man seeking revenge, nor glory. It was the gaze of someone who had already decided his fate. "You are told," Hale said, his voice even, stripped of theatrics. "The law was clear, and yet you crossed." Veyrek bared his teeth, forcing a growl through the thickness of his humiliation.
"Kill me, then."
"Do it and prove the council right. Prove the humans are monsters in the dark." But Hale did not raise a weapon. He stepped closer, unarmed, his expression unreadable. "Death is too merciful. You will live, Commander. And you will speak." Confusion flickered across Veyrek's face, quickly consumed by rage. "I will not kneel. I will not beg." "You will not need to," Hale replied. He motioned, and Anders placed a small recorder on the console. Its light blinked steadily, waiting. "You will tell the galaxy what happened here. You will tell them what you found when you defied the law. Not because I command it, but because your silence will damn your people more than your words ever could. They will see your defeat, hear your voice, and they will remember." The bridge crew shifted uneasily, their eyes darting to Veyrek. Their commander, who had mocked the warnings, who had promised them triumph, now sat broken beneath the calm shadow of a human. For the first time, they saw him hesitate. Veyrek's throat worked, pride warring against survival. His voice emerged ragged but audible. This is not victory. You fight with shadows, with tricks." Hale leaned closer, his words quiet but sharp enough to carve into memory. "Victory is not measured by noise. It is measured by what remains. And look around you, Commander. What remains of your fleet?" The silence that followed was heavier than any outcry. At last, with a snarl of defeat, Veyrek slammed his claw against the console, activating the recorder. His words came halting at first, then steady, each syllable carrying the bitter weight of submission. "This is Commander Veyrek of the Dominion fleet. We crossed into human space. We ignored the law. And now we are undone. Do not cross the humans." The recorder blinked once more before Hale reached forward and shut it off. He regarded Veyrek for a moment, not with triumph, but with a solemn detachment. "Your voice will carry farther than mine ever could. That is the lesson." Admiral Rourke's transmission arrived as the boarding team withdrew. His image materialized on the flickering screen, his features stern but tinged with relief. "It's done, then." Hale inclined his head. "The fleet is broken. Their commander has given his testimony. The council will hear it." Rourke studied him, his expression heavy with the weight of politics. "We could have ended them, Marcus. Erase their fleet, their world, their empire. Was restraint worth the risk? Hale's pale eyes met his superiors. Destruction is forgotten. Fear endures. If they survive, they will remind others. If we had annihilated them, only rubble would remain, and rubble does not speak. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Rourke gave a curt nod. Very well. Return to base. The Council will have its proof. The transmission faded, leaving Hale in the quiet hum of his ship. Anders approached, hesitant, the question plain on his face. Do you think Veyrek will truly tell them everything? That he'll warn them? Hale turned toward the viewport, where the mining world glowed softly below, untouched, as though the battle had never happened. He already has. His voice may shake, his pride may twist it, but the message will spread. And that is enough. Anders followed his gaze, his jaw tight. Do you ever wonder, sir, what the galaxy thinks we are? Hale's expression did not change, but his words carried the weight of a truth he had long accepted. It doesn't matter what they think. It matters that they remember. The Dominion fleet drifted as wreckage in orbit, silent and broken, a monument to arrogance and a warning carved into steel. Across the galaxy, whispers would rise again, stronger than before, the old words spoken with renewed reverence. Do not cross the humans. And in the heart of it all, Marcus Hale stood as the embodiment of that law, not as a conqueror, not as a tyrant, but as the quiet certainty that some boundaries were not meant to be crossed. His work here was finished, but the silence he had created would echo far beyond this single system, shaping choices, steering empires, and reminding all who looked toward the pale worlds of humanity that the law was written not in myth, but in memory. The stars stretched on, endless and unblinking, but somewhere in that vastness, rulers and commanders would pause before charting their course, would reconsider ambition against the weight of history. The galaxy would breathe more carefully, its expansion tempered by the lesson delivered not in fire, but in silence. And for Marcus Hale, that was victory enough. You said,